So the first takeaway, I think, is the tone there, right? Amicable, not angry compared to last time. One thing struck me in particular, you remember J.D. Vance, the first go around, he specifically said, calling out Zelenskyy, said, have you said thank you once? Wow. I noted that the first words out of Zelensky's mouth were thank you. He said it more than a dozen times in the course of those comments.
Thanking for the weapons as well.
Thanking for the weapons, thanking the United States, thanking the European allies. That was one thing that was significant. The other thing that obviously hung over this was the topic of wardrobe, right? When he came in, just for optics, and those matter to the president, who in many ways produces his own presidency. The very same reporter who last go around asked Zelenskyy why he wasn't wearing a proper suit, a gentleman by the name of Brian Glenn, who it turns out is dating MTG, as he says, Marjorie Taylor Greene. He says, I thought your suit looks pretty good here. Zelenskyy notably had a pretty quick retort here. He says, it looks like you are wearing the same suit. You'll remember Zelenskyy was a former comedian, is a comedian. He produced and created Servant of the People, a popular show which helped his rise to power, much like his television chops here in the U.S. helped Donald Trump's rise as well. There were also questions that were answered this time around compared to no questions that were answered when Vladimir Putin met with the president just recently. And then one important fact check here, as long as we're keeping our audience aware. The president says he thinks the U.S. has spent $300 to maybe $350 billion. The number is much closer to $174 billion, 5 separate packages that were passed by Congress right now in the form of supplemental funding to Ukraine, not just to Ukraine, but some of its allies in the region. So while the president has inflated that number, it's still certainly a lot of money, but nowhere near the $300 billion he insists.
Yeah, this meeting a little bit off schedule, went 30 minutes longer probably than everyone expected, but the president, of course, answering questions, and taking a lot of questions as well. I want to bring in Keir Simmons, our chief international correspondent, who's been observing all of this from Europe right now. Keir, talk to us about some of the things you noticed. I know you and I were exchanging messages. That question, the 2 questions about American peacekeeping troops was quite interesting, because we know both the UK and the French have committed to peacekeeping troops in Russia. But this is interesting. NATO troops, Vladimir Putin would never go for. But do you think he would be okay with troops from the UK, possibly the US and France there in Ukraine?
You know, Tom, it's evening in Moscow, and you bet in the Kremlin they will have been watching that closely. They will have been disappointed, as you have just pointed out, not to have seen another blowout between President Zelenskyy and President Trump and Vice President Vance. They will be noting the way that the Ukrainians appear to be more careful in the way they approach President Trump, handing over the letter from the Ukrainian First Lady, as Peter mentioned, saying thank you multiple times. But it was also interesting, and you point to it, what wasn't said. I mean, President Trump was asked specifically an absolutely crucial question: are you willing to send U.S. peacekeepers to Ukraine? And he didn't answer that question. And why is that so important? Because the man you saw sitting there, President Zelenskyy, will have to put a huge amount on the line if he was to agree to ceding the amount of territory that appears to have come out of the proposal on Friday. Maybe even, as Richard said earlier, ceding more territory. It looks like what he is potentially going to be offered in exchange for that is a security guarantee that Russia will not invade again, will not renew its offensive. And you can see there from the map just how much land is still held by the Russians, and how that land runs down to Crimea, and so how the Russians are very unlikely to agree to negotiate over that. So if President Zelenskyy is going to get the security guarantees that he clearly needs, then President Trump is at the very least going to need to say that the United States will support the security of Ukraine. If that means boots on the ground, or if that means a promise that the U.S. would send boots on the ground in the case of President Putin renewing his offensive, is that something that President Trump would agree to? And I think that's going to be one of the crucial questions that's going to be discussed right now as they head off for these meetings with European leaders.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or watch live on our YouTube channel.